It began with William Afton, the man who just couldn't stop. The loss of his daughter couldn't stop him, nor could the loss of his son stop him from hurting people, from hurting kids, simply because he wanted to. Not even death, decay, ignominy, and the ruination of everything he'd ever built could stop him from killing. 40 years of misery, because he just couldn't stop hurting people. And if you ask me, I don't think even at the end he regretted a single second of cruelty. And all of that led us to here.
The Mimic! From Five Nights at Freddy's!
The Five Nights at Freddy's chapter has at long last arrived to Dead by Daylight's PTB, and dear God was it an arrival for the ages. 100,000 people were watching that live stream between YouTube, Twitch, and the various restreams on both platforms. An hour or so later, all 100,000 of those people were having multiple simultaneous crash outs when they all tried to log onto the PTB at the same time and fried the servers. And it's all down to this guy, the man behind the slaughter, the undead kid-slashing bunny rabbit himself, Springtrap. But even though the chapter got revealed almost an entire year ago, even though we all knew that killer queues on the PTB would have to be measured in ice ages, there was still this sense of fantastic electric enthusiasm that reached a fever pitch because this character, and the franchise it represents, means a lot to a lot of people. The power seems to be broadly well liked, but a killer is so much more than a hitbox, a unique status effect, and a few add-ons. They are a character. And there's no character that's ever arrived in DBD with as much hype as Springtrap. But did the Five Nights at Freddy's chapter live up to that hype? Today we're going to be putting the FNAF chapter through its paces, taking a look at the lore that Scott Cawthon and Behaviour cooked up together to add Springtrap to the fog, and then at the wider chapter as a whole to get a sense of how smooth the transition was between the genre-defining horror game with a notorious fanbase, questionable storytelling, and a gradually decaying adherence to the horror genre, and of course, Five Nights at Freddy's. Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers, to the one you've all been waiting for. The Five Nights at Freddy's chapter and its leading man, William Afton, Springtrap, or the animatronic. Springtrap's story begins long before he entered the fog, when he was the mortal man, William Afton. He was an upstanding family man who worked alongside his business partner, Henry Emily, to open Fredbear's Family Diner, where he built animatronics to entertain the guests. But when a Fredbear animatronic bit and killed a young boy in 1983, the business got rebranded as Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. But Afton was hiding a dark secret. He had killed several children, including Henry's own daughter Charlotte, and hid their bodies inside the animatronics he made for the pizzeria. That would come back to bite him later. In 1987, another traumatic biting incident occurred, the infamous Bite of 87, where the victim's frontal lobe got bitten off by someone who definitely wasn't Mangle, honest, and the pizzeria's reputation took a nosedive, causing the animatronics to only be allowed to wander at night, and leading to the events of the first Five Nights at Freddy's game in 1993. The pizzeria was closed down not long after in 1995, when Afton returned to the pizzeria but was haunted by ghosts of the dead children sealed inside the animatronics. He was wearing a Spring Bonnie outfit fitted with spring locks, highly temperamental mechanisms that held animatronic components inside the body so it could be worn as a suit, removed, and then work independently as an animatronic. But when the ghosts of the dead children sealed him in the pizzeria's safe room and the spring locks failed, Afton was skewered by dozens of mechanical parts, dying in agony on the floor of the safe room as his flesh was pulverized like a car in a crusher. This is where Dead by Daylight's lore for Afton picked him up, because in the mainline canon he rotted there in the remains of the pizzeria for 30 years until he's removed from the safe room and taken to Fazbear's Fright, where the events of FNAF 3 saw him rise from the dead and attempt to recommence his reign of terror. His shadow has loomed over every game since, even after the pizzeria burning down at the end of FNAF 3 and his apparent final death in the FNAF 6 fire. But in the world of Dead by Daylight, things went a little differently. He woke up instead in the pizzeria itself, outside of the safe room, or at least with the safe room now unsealed. As he regains consciousness, Afton hears children's laughter of a sort, emanating from the kitchen, and like any true dedicated child murderer, he decides to get right back on the grind. But instead of finding a bunch of pizza-loving kiddies to murder, he instead finds a thick, dark fog rolling against the far wall of the kitchen. He sees something moving inside. People. Something worth hunting deep in the dark of the fog, and he feels an opportunity at his fingertips. And thus the entity claims William Afton for its own. First things first, I'm a little surprised that for a franchise that attracts some of the biggest lore whores in horror game history, that the FNAF chapter seems to have relatively little actual lore. Springtrap's bio is slightly shorter than the other licensed killers we've had recently, which felt odd at first glance given how much story the old man's had over the years. That doesn't bother me at all, because most licensed lore we get in DBD is almost entirely recaps of existing story moments with a thick black fog at the end. Take Tokyo Ghoul for example. Kaneki's lore was a decent length, but it was just a recap of Tokyo Ghoul Season 1, except the entity appears in the last sentence or two to take Kaneki away. But Springtrap is a little bit different. The entire passage in his lore is all new stuff, picking up shortly before the events of Five Nights at Freddy's 3 and taking a perspective we never really have before. That of Springtrap himself. This perspective is definitely valuable. We're normally pretty limited by the point of view of FNAF's immobile and silent player characters, so it's a nice change to see the man behind the slaughter, so to speak. It's not a terribly complex amount of self-reflection, because Springtrap is not a terribly complex character, and it's a really nice touch that he's immediately drawn to the sound of laughing children, and is filled with a desire to kill because it was established in FNAF 3 that he can be lured around by children's laughter. He might have his own mind and will, but he's still governed in part by the animatronics programming. This means that for established FNAF fans, the DBD chapter offers something genuinely special. A brief but unique insight into the mind of the monster behind the series, and it's clear by a lack of a recap for non-FNAF fans that this was the entire point going into it. If this wasn't a section made for fans, but instead to introduce people, there would be a recap so that the non-fans could get up to speed. But this bio is made for the people who wanted more Springtrap in his earliest moments. But this choice to reflect on Springtrap's earliest iteration does come with a few teeny tiny continuity issues, because what would a FNAF lore segment be without that? Yeah baby, it's time for the Great Nit-Pickening. So, Springtrap's DBD lore is set before FNAF 3. That has been established. The lore doesn't explicitly say that he woke up in the pizzeria, but it does say the laughter is coming from the kitchen. And at least in the game, Fazbear's Fright doesn't have a kitchen in FNAF 3, which suggests that when this story starts, Afton's still at the pizzeria. But if you remember the Night 6 tape from FNAF 3, you'll remember the safe room he was originally spring-locked in was sealed for 30 years. Management built a whole wall over it, and it was only unsealed by a bunch of workers taking him away to Fazbear's Fright.
Hello. This is just to inform all employees that due to budget restrictions, the previously mentioned safe rooms are being sealed at most locations, including this one. Work crews will be here most of the day today, constructing a false wall over the old door face. Nothing is being taken out beforehand, so if you left anything inside, then it's your own fault. Management also requests that this room not be mentioned to family, friends, or insurance representatives.
So how did Springtrap get out of the safe room while remaining in the pizzeria? The only reason but an explanation is that the workers took down the wall, removed Springtrap thinking he was a normal animatronic, and then they left him for the night so he could get up and leave the entity's realm. Which is feasible, but also nothing to support this reading is ever mentioned in the lore. It fills in the gap as a theory, but it doesn't add anything beyond this, so it doesn't feel like a mystery you're rewarded for solving. It feels more like you're editing the first draft of the lore or correcting an oversight. And if you do go by the leaving him for the night theory, there's other continuity issues here if you look at his in-game portrayal. In the trials proper, Springtrap's fire axe is burning as a reference to the fire that destroyed Fazbear's Fright in the 3rd game, and the final pizzeria fire in the 6th game. But in the DBD continuity, both of those things haven't happened yet, so why does he have a burning fire axe? Same goes for the several voice lines that he has referencing the events of FNAF 3 and especially FNAF 6. Why is he referencing these events if they haven't happened yet? Scott and Behaviour clearly want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to have the classic actor PJ Hayward making jibes and remarks about the events of those games, but still wants to have him collected by the entity early in the lore, so they don't have to explain why he's using the iconic FNAF 3 look instead of resembling fucking Scraptrap or something.
Squire, hand me my melon baller, I tire of my bloody eyesight.
Scott and Behaviour couldn't commit to a consistent story for DBD Springtrap in keeping with the game's lore, and it asks a ton of questions it's not really prepared to answer. Yes, it is a nitpick, and no, it is not one I'm surprised to find. At the end of the day, this is FNAF. If Scott Cawthon kept me up at night every time he wrote inconsistent lore for his characters, I'd get less sleep than Quentin Smith. But more than most licensed collaborations, FNAF's community is immensely invested in the storytelling and the lore that's been built up for almost a decade now. So, more than usual, this licensed lore actually matters. This chapter is clearly meant, above everything else, for the FNAF fans. So allowing the quality of the lore to become compromised when you're potentially making the chapter for a fan base that cares a lot about it just seems wrong to me. The characterization is solid and a pretty good addition to the Springtrap saga, but in terms of standing up well alongside the rest of the FNAF universe, the story itself might as well have been written in crayon. I didn't notice all this stuff by myself, by the way. A mutual of mine, Pocket Stakes, posted his thread about it, and I spoke to him afterwards, and we tried to untangle the mess that Behaviour and Scott have left us with. Pocket Stakes' original thread is linked in the description, so do go check him out. They make some pretty brilliant art on the regular too, so definitely drop him a follow. Fortunately, there's a lot more to the FNAF chapter than a few voice lines by PJ Hayward and a short bio in dire need of an editor's pen. FNAF is a series defined largely by its environmental storytelling. The games themselves are light on dialogue and actual story for the most part, so the fans are typically left to piece it together from what we can see, find and interpret from the world FNAF paints around them. The combination of eerie tension and a surprising attention to detail is the FNAF experience at its best. And that is something the DVD FNAF chapter absolutely nails, in the art design of the killer and especially the map. Of course, Springtrap's model is nothing short of exceptional. I've long said that since Unknown or Vecna we've been on a run of absolutely amazing killer models, and Springtrap is no exception. His DBD model is a loving recreation of his FNAF 3 iteration, the only good Springtrap design we've ever had, and his animations and sound design are absolutely first rate, with particular acclaim needed for the distinction between the corpse and the spring Bonnie suit over the top of it. The way that Afton's rotten flesh still shows and moves and twists while the suit's segments and plates remain rigid, it really sells the horror of what Afton has done to himself, what he's become, in a way that FNAF struggles to do sometimes. Because of the full range of movement and animation that DBD demands, Afton is able to emote more than he's ever done before. I even noticed that his idle standing pose is that iconic stance from FNAF 3. It's a genuinely loving recreation of the character, even the bits about him that I don't necessarily like about the character. Is now a bad time for me to admit that I never really thought PJ Hayward's voice fit the character of Springtrap that well? He obviously sounds different between his work in DBD and FNAF, but he always just sounded to me like a guy with a bit of a sore throat who was trying too hard to sound generically scary and evil.
Would whoever is making that sound quiet down?
I definitely see why they kept the voice a bit more similar to his FNAF version, because at the end of the day you've got to appeal to the crowd who was already turning up. So I guess the fact that I still don't like it very much indicates they've done a good job in maintaining that consistency. When I see a design like Springtrap, where the body is just completely ruined and covered in bits of metal, I imagine the voice to feel kind of pained or gurgly, you know? Like there's actual animatronic parts shoved into the lungs and throat to kind of strangle the speech a bit. So when I read the lines out in my head, I read it something like this.
The darkest pits of hell are now open for business. It is not your flesh that sustains me. It is your fear. I always come back.
You see, I'm not a professional voice actor, so I'm sure there's countless people who could do this better than me, but I hope you can at least kind of see now my perspective on the character, and why the PJ Hayward voice never really vibed with me. The Mori is likely the most controversial part of Springtrap's animation set, and it's where you can start to really see the influence of the FNAF movie creeping in. The endo that pops up and turns into the shreddy Faz chair is just a bit lame, if I'm honest. It doesn't really have the sheer characterful charm of, say, Houndmaster's Mori, since Springtrap doesn't really do anything himself.
Was that the bite of 87?
And when it comes to some of the crazier Moris we've gotten lately, like Vecna and Trueform Dracula, it lacks in source a bit. It ironically makes the same mistake that the animatronics themselves made in the movie. As my good friend Roby said in his video on FNAF a little while ago, the horror of dying in the original FNAF was about being stuffed into a mascot suit. It was about having your body put through a ricer. and the movie and by extension DVD, turning that into a generic pile of buzzsaws like a shooting backlot from Robot Wars, lacks that visceral, unfeeling, mechanical nastiness that makes FNAF's most memorable death so uncomfortable. By comparison, it's just a bit bland. But the Mori isn't the only place that the movie's influence can be felt, because I'm just going to say this now, the Pizzeria map is one of the best maps we've ever gotten for Dead by Daylight, and hands down our best licensed map. The attention to detail all over the Pizzeria is just immaculate, and this brings the place to life in a way we've never seen before. All we see at the Pizzeria in the first FNAF is a bunch of still images, all of which provide good atmosphere but are antithetical to exploration, while the movie version is the exact opposite. It feels like a movie set for a PG-13 film. It's open and well lit, and mostly tidy if not really clean. The horror implicit in the original game is toned down a bit to fit the PG-13 movie that we wound up with. Dead by Daylight's version of the map really doesn't do this at all. It builds on the layout and theming of the movie set, and gives it a thick coating of grime and gore, allowing us to depict it without diluting DBD's horror tone. The meaty growths on the walls, the dim lighting, the mess in the dining room and bathroom, including, yes, the pizza in the toilet, it really makes it look and feel like the disused and rotting pizzeria it was always supposed to be. And there's tons of Easter eggs too, like the ball pit, with body parts and the bloody sneakers that can spawn as an alternative to the basement. The animatronic masks and heads in maintenance with eyes that follow you around the room if you get too close. The lurching endo in the vents in storage, the kitchen ovens that turn on and growl at you when you enter, and of course, the band banging out the tunes when you complete the generator in the dining room. There's even meant to be a cupcake jump scare on the map somewhere, but I won't tell you where it is. I want you to be surprised when you find it for yourself. It's a gorgeous recreation of FNAF's most iconic location, and it wasn't in any way compromised to function as a DBD map either. It fits into the rotting 20th century world of the Withered Isle like it was born for it. In a way, it reminds me of the Nostromo, another claustrophobic, iconic horror location that got reimagined into a map in an existing DBD realm. Except Nostromo is one of the worst bits of the Alien chapter because the compromises that were made to it were so extensive that it flattened it down and stopped feeling like the Nostromo. But the Pizzeria is the opposite. DBD's version of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was built on top of the existing location. No, not like that. In a way that integrated it well with DBD's tone and map design without forgetting what it's building on top of. It's incredibly authentic, atmospheric, and as a side effect, it also made one of DBD's most fun and balanced maps to play on as well. Just a wonderful addition to the game. But there is one particular bit of the Pizzeria notably missing from the map, and that is a security room. You know, where the gameplay of FNAF actually takes place, and that's because the security room isn't on the map. It's in Springtrap's power. When you travel through one of these security doors that spawn in any trial with Springtrap, you're transported into the security room as a kind of liminal space before appearing out of another door across the map. This gives both sides the means to traverse the map, and survivors can also use cameras attached to these doors to mark Springtrap's location. But interacting with the doors has its own perils, and Springtrap can ambush a survivor while they travel through the doors. The whole system is extremely evocative of the gameplay that FNAF provides, especially the first game, and that's a hell of a game design achievement given how different DBD and FNAF's core gameplay loops are. And that is all down to the aesthetic details. The security office itself looks like the one from the first FNAF game, the text and UI for the cameras and the doors, the jump scare when Springtrap finds you in the office. None of it directly impacts the gameplay, but it makes the experience of playing, and especially playing against the killer, incredibly evocative of the FNAF vibes. And that's really interesting because aside from the camera, Springtrap's power isn't really anything particularly special from a gameplay point of view. He throws a heavier Huntress hatchet and has xenomorph tunnels that spawn across the map, but neither of those things in themselves are particularly innovative gameplay pieces. But they're all brought to life by the FNAF bells and whistles, like the jump scares in the security room. Not to mention the unique flair like the changing movement speed when the axe is removed, the heavy arc making shots over tiles more consistent, more in line with Unknown than Huntress, and the fact that survivors can use the portals too. There is definitely some sauce here, even if it's not a power that I'm rushing to play with much, you know? But regardless of how fun the power might be to play with or play against, you can tell that the aesthetics and the vibes fit better with FNAF than the mechanics of the power itself. It might play well, but it doesn't really play FNAF, even if it looks the part. And there's some people who found this to be quite frustrating. But I think part of this was kind of inevitable because FNAF and DBD are such fundamentally different horror experiences. There was a lot of work that Behaviour had to do to make the experience, characters and images of FNAF translate into Dead by Daylight smoothly. Again, similar to the issue the Alien chapter had. But Alien lost a lot of stuff in transition from screen to Steam. The Xenomorph's acid blood got relegated to an iridescent add-on. The general themes of violation and forced pregnancy via the facehuggers is almost completely absent. It's gone from the central source of horror to a jump scare in the medbay. And the Nostromo turned from a cramped, oppressive corporate shell suspended in the dark void of space to, well, a main building. Hell, Ripley didn't even look like Ripley anymore. Alien got watered down in the process of adapting it in Dead by Daylight to maximise the broad appeal of such a well-known licensed IP, but FNAF went in completely the opposite direction. Alien got chipped away, but FNAF got built up. Stuff got added to Springtrap and the Pizzeria to allow them to fit the mould of a DBD chapter, and that might be where a lot of consternation comes from.
There's perhaps no better symbol of the division between groups of fans than the fire axe as part of the power. For anyone who doesn't know, the fire axe was not something that Springtrap canonically wielded at any point in the FNAF series. It's only ever appeared before in fan works, like its point of origin in the Die in a Fire song by the Living Tombstone they made for FNAF 3. Some people were really excited to see this testament to the fans' creativity wrapped into the power and implicitly becoming canon in Dead by Daylight, but I know others found it to just be exhausting. Like the fan interpretation is overwriting the canon character they previously enjoyed.
To some fans, a fire axe and security doors with cameras and a jump scare are exactly what they wanted FNAF and DBD to always feel like, and Behaviour building these elements onto the bits they already know and love is perfect, but to others they would have preferred Behaviour build the chapter in a different direction. Some people would have preferred a power that's more of a testament to the series as a whole, where the animatronics could play a bigger part as something other than set dressing. Others might prefer a more lore-accurate power, where he stuffs the survivors into spring-lock suits or something. Other players again might be really upset at the lack of a survivor choice for the chapter, or at the seeming lack of FNAF legendaries for existing characters.
I guess that's the awkward thing about a dream chapter, especially one that's been as mythologized as FNAF has been, and has been teased and demanded for so long. When you have a dream, like FNAF and Dead by Daylight, you have this version of it in your head, this perfect, idealized version of this thing that you want. And no one can tarnish it for you. It's exactly the way you want it to be. And then FNAF comes to DBD with a whole year of fanfare. You spend that time imagining and being excited that you're finally going to get your dream, and then it isn't quite what you expected. It will probably never be what you wanted it to be, and that sucks. But it was always going to suck for someone. If not you, then somebody else. Some fans will always be disappointed because they didn't get the 12 legendaries and 2 killers they were hoping for, with the first official canon face reveal for Michael Afton, and Scott Cawthon making out sloppy style with Matthew Cote right there on the stage at PAX. I am not one of those disappointed fans. I've been quite upfront about the fact that I do not care for FNAF as a series or as a licensed IP for Dead by Daylight, and this chapter is not going to change that. So maybe what I'm saying here isn't quite as valuable as it would be coming from a proper fan, but if I got a license that I loved, arriving to DBD with the same amount of hype and care as Springtrap got, with a power and animations and sound and map, and details as lovingly crafted as the Five Nights at Freddy's chapter, I would be absolutely overjoyed. Truth be told, I'm pretty jealous of you guys. I see Springtrap's gorgeous model and the evocative jump scares and camera UI and everything, and I want to see that level of work done on my favourite licensed characters. I want to see it on Art the Clown or a Predator someday. I see all the little details and Easter eggs on the Pizzeria, and I want to see that on the Baker Estate or Camp Crystal Lake or the blasted battlefields of the Siege of Vrax. Yes, the FNAF chapter could be better. The lore is unfortunately quite shit, the Mori is a bit underwhelming, and the lack of a survivor definitely stinks. But it's a release that I think will broadly age well and make a lot of players very happy in the long term if it's maintained properly. If you're one of those people, then congratulations. I'm genuinely very happy for you. But if you're not one of those people, if you're a bit like me and just don't give enough of a shit about FNAF to really care about this chapter, or if you were really excited for it and just feel underwhelmed by the end result, there's always the next chapter, and sooner or later FNAF will just be another license in DBD's long history. Friends and foes, survivors and killers, hold tight. It's a long wait till September. See you next time.